Diane. One of the things I love about Oh Brother is that it takes this very dramatic piece that's been around thousands of years and tosses a whole new spin on it, and takes drama and turns it into comedy, but it keeps a lot of dramatic, a lot of the dramatic flair there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in the midst of all that, where did you see God?
We thought you would ask that.
I saw God in the main character's acceptance of the blues musician.
Yeah, Everett or Delmer.
All three of them.
All three of them. Yeah, yeah.
Take him in and make him a fourth, you know.
Yeah, to step across those very hard drawn Southern U.S. lines, racial lines.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
They rescued Tommy from being
Lynched.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then George Clooney character. Oh, he was
Everett.
Ulysses. He rescued the man who had been imprisoned afterwards, and he was in his bed at night, and he got him out. So there was a kind of a bond between all of them that they were going to keep. And then I loved at the end that there were four of them, and that they were like the four figures in Gone with the Wind, and Gone with the Wind. I mean, three.
Oz, Wizard of
Wizard of
Oz.
Oz, yeah.
Wizard of Oz.
So those four characters completed one, and
Yeah.
they bonded and helped each other.
Yeah, and the thing of it is that there was tension in that, you know, like when he revealed, you know, here's my real intentions.
Yeah.
You just had to come with me because these chains here.
Yeah.
But they formed beyond that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what life sometimes does. Pete, for example, the one that he went back to save in the prison, he no longer had to do that because of the chains.
Right.
Yeah.
He went back because of the bond that they had formed,
Yeah.
with the very real possibility of not completing the mission.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, maybe the bond was God
Maybe the bond was God. I definitely think that
in action.
that relationship always reflects
Yeah.
the divine.
Yeah.
Because for me, the divine is more of a verb than a noun, rather than being a person. It's a relationship.
Yes.
So it's that action of moving towards each other, and by that definition, they definitely were finding connection.
Oh, yeah.
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 So I'd like to mention the role of music in the movie. It seemed like it was used to maybe signify the action of God that was coming. The first one preceded their escape, and then the group going down to the river to pray.
Yeah.
The next thing was their encounter with Tommy.
Yeah.
And then they're singing at the radio station. Then there was the next encounter, I guess, with Babyface Nelson.
Yeah. Right. Oh my.
But as
And
a
the
whole,
three-
the score was incredible, wasn't it?
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful select. Yeah.
With very off, so often the score becomes our music right now, right? Some genre of today's music. And this was not today's music, but it brought all of that, which was almost every single one of those that I think was some kind of traditional song that came and sang to a new generation.
That choral piece during the river baptism was musically so powerful.
Yeah. Well, and that scene in particular is probably one that hits me every single time I see it, or every single time I speak of it, because I have used that illustration so often. The wild look that gets in Delmer's eyes as he says, "Here's something I got to do." His belief that suddenly it changed him, even though the police kept chasing after him, right? But that he was different because of that moment, whatever he thinks happened in that moment. And it's pretty powerful. And it makes us wonder, what are those kinds of changing moments for us? What do you look back on and say, this is what Delmer would have said, this is when I was saved. When is it that you were saved, changed, made into something that you hadn't been before that? What were those kinds of moments for you? And he wasn't completely changed, don't get me wrong. But I love the scene, you know, they continued to run from, they continued to steal the pie, but then Delmer went and put $1 on the,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just things like that that he wouldn't have done before, but that he approached life differently afterwards.
Oh, yeah, yeah, true.
I mean,
And he told Katie, I'm not a bad guy, or we're not bad guys. The two of us are good guys now because we.
yeah, because we did this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what have been those kinds of moments for you, which have kind of changed the trajectory of your life, made your journey different than before?
Well, I had a born again experience when I was 18 that radically changed my life. And for a handful of years, I was a charismatic fundamentalist Christian, which I grew out of, but it still was a life-changing experience. You know?
Right. Right. And the tough part about all of those types of experiences is whenever somebody tells you, okay, all the work's done. Because you're right, that starts a new life, but it doesn't mean that the divine doesn't continue to change and move you. And I think sometimes the problem with those born again, because I've had that type of experience as well, is that oftentimes they say, okay, finished. And that's too bad when that happens.
Yeah.
Got your fire insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of like saying, speaking of marriage, okay, you got married, there's no more work to be done.
Yeah.
Right? Because marriage can be one of those born again type of experiences, because who you are before that, those I do's, and who you are afterwards, it's completely different. You define yourself differently, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And
But
some of
hopefully it changes you into who you need to be. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, some of those changes are more subtle than they are dramatic too.
They are.
And sometimes reflecting back, I think they're fluid.
Uh-huh.
Something informed me, or I started to think in a new way, which then continued to grow and change. So
Yeah.
it isn't necessarily a moment as it is, certainly a process, but something fluid.
Yeah. Yeah. And the hard part is we want to be like Delmer, who says, I'm fixed. That means the authorities aren't coming after me. Right? And that's just not quite what happens. That whatever you were before that moment continues to affect you. You just have to deal with it differently than what you would have beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of marriage, that good-looking person that you would have seen before marriage, you're still going to see. You just have to decide to think differently in that moment because of the vow that you've taken.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The way you live life before and after a child changes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because as soon as that child comes into your life, it changes, it sets you on a new birth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Not completely losing everything about you, but definitely changing much of how you have to live in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Happened to us in March when we got a puppy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. A new job does it,
Yeah.
right? Relocation to a new place, even if you're in the very same type of position as before, just being in a new a new city changes that.
Mhm.
I
There's a chance
remember,
that presidential elections do that.
Oh, boy,
Yeah.
sure do.
Sorry, I interrupted someone.
I was going to say, I remember getting a phone call. Doris and I had been, we're in our first year of marriage and we're working with an organization we were in Los Angeles, and I got a call from the headquarters that said, your wife has a teaching degree, and we have someone who's leaving a position in Singapore, and wondered about whether the two of you would be willing to relocate to Singapore. And that was the start of a lot of changes for us.
Are you up for the challenge kind of question, right?
Yeah,
And the adventure.
Did you go?
of course.
Good.
Uh,
Oh.
Some of those decisions too are ones that you make quickly because you know the right to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The difficulty is that this movie, like a lot of movies, is a journey movie, right? They're traveling from the prison to the to get Everett over to his wife and kids, right?
Yeah.
Some of them don't know that's their journey, but that's the journey. And yet the journey itself goes in all kinds of places. It's not like it's a straight journey from the prison over, because they went past some semblance of the prison all the way through. Not just the people chasing them, but when they drove past Pete working on the chain gang after he'd been recaptured.
Yeah.
It's like, well, wait a second, didn't they leave that place weeks ago? And yet there he is, right?
They all came into the movie theater.
Yeah. And so that sense of journey is rarely the straight and narrow, simple, you know, I can figure it out exactly journey that we wish it was. And you have to sometimes, like you said, Diane, very quickly make a decision to go somewhere else. When George, the gangster, drives up, they have to decide, do we want to get involved in this? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Back to the
Sometimes
music.
Go ahead.
Back to the music, you know, a lot of it was positive, like when we go down to the river to pray. But the one where the Ku Klux Klan is marching and singing was also another one of those moments where they were moved to take action.
Yeah, and it's a powerful song. Oh, death, oh, death, right? How do you wade through the Ku Klux Klan like that?
Yeah.
What carries you through a tunnel like that?
Mm.
And yet there they went. I saw people who yesterday kind of felt like they were doing that type of thing as they, with much trepidation, went off to vote because they weren't sure what kind of death tunnel they were walking through.
I love the way the Coen brothers snitch images from other very familiar adventures, journeys, and so on, not just the Odyssey, but the Ku Klux Klan marching is right out of the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, da 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 da, oh, and so on. So there's always that edge of the absurd, which is both funny and perhaps scary or frightening or bewildering at the same time, especially with the Ku Klux Klan and with the Cyclops right in the middle of it, pursuing them.
Right. And after they finished it, the Coen brothers refused to call it a remake of The Odyssey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of how the storyline developed as they went along.
Mhm.
It was definitely a work in progress as they were going along.
Well,
Changing.
I
Go ahead.
think what I got from the Odyssey was keep the faith, and all through the movie, it kept telling me, keep the faith, he's going to make it. And they did. So that really showed out to me.
Yeah. And that's what's hard in the midst of a journey, isn't it? This looks like this is going to derail us.
mhm.
But then something always came to help them out.
Something always came to help them out.
Mhm.
Right? And sometimes it's the weirdest thing. You know, Pete disappeared. Well, got turned into a toad.
Yeah.
Right? And they're carrying that toad along, thinking it's Pete. Right? We hold on to things like that in the most miraculous way.
And they were being faithful to him too, even though he was now a toad.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't forsake Pete because he's a toad.
No.
So for a magician to turn him back.
Yeah. He's got to find somebody like that, right?
What about the man with the handcar, the black guy that
Oh.
prophesies and then shows up again at the end of the movie?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And showed up at the end as well, if you notice.
Yeah.
Wasn't he Tiresias from Greek myth?
Yes.
I don't know if it was in the Odyssey or something else, but
Yeah.
the blind seer. Yeah.
The blind seer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
He's the
the
one
oracle.
who starts them on this journey.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
And he warns them that they will find something that is precious to them, a treasure, but not the one that they're seeking.
Yeah. And isn't that the hard one?
Yeah.
We think we know exactly what we need.
Mhm.
But going back to what we talked about before, those born again moments, those moments that change us, it's often because we find that there's a different treasure than what we were looking for. Right? And it makes us take a different road at the crossroads.
Mhm.
George Clooney's character was interesting to me because it seems so innocuous, if not benevolent, and yet at key times in the movie, they revealed pretty serious flaws in his behavior, you know. And that's just kind of how we are, isn't it?
Yeah. I think in some ways the worst movies, the movies I hate the most, are the ones that make it too easy. Somebody's always just right and somebody else is always just wrong.
Right.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
I love much better when it's the flawed nature of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Complexity.
And good placed on top of flawed characters as well. Silence of the Lambs was that way because Hannibal Lecter was evil, right? He was just evil. And yet you couldn't quite take your eyes away from him either. Because in the midst of all that he was wrong about, he was also powerful and wondrous in some of the things that he was and did.
Mm-hmm.
And you hated that you liked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to see in Everett that type of flawed helps us. Catherine, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, so many things, like everyone else. And I think what strikes me for my own life is the recognition that God could choose to use me, even though I have flaws, and spent a lot of my time working on my own healing, that I could be tapped and be an instrument. And I think that's that was a pretty neat understanding that I got, and to accept when it was offered the opportunities to help others or to be of service, and never mind that I didn't do everything just perfect all the time.
But that sense of perfection plagues many of us in different ways. That sense of here's the right way to do it. Here's everything that has, you know, the outline of who to be. And it's often that we find our mission in those flawed places.
Mhm.
But I think it's because of things like this. It's hard for someone who hasn't been divorced to be in the life, positively in the life of someone who is going through divorce.
Mhm.
It's hard for someone who has not lost somebody to death to be positively in the same way in the life of someone who is grieving. Right? All your own experience, your own flaws help you to be in that space better.
You're going to have to do an extended sermon on that one.
Yeah, because none of us like to admit our flaws. We've been told in a lot of ways in our society not to. Things like divorce, for example, I call the no casserole disease.
No casserole.
You know,
Oh,
because
yeah.
if somebody has cancer, people rally around easily.
Yeah.
If someone loses their spouse, people rally around. Divorce kind of sets us in this space of saying, whoa, what do I do? I like both of them. How do I, you know, and so we often unconsciously sometimes distance from.
Yeah.
And yet that person needs the rally around as much as the other circumstances, maybe even more, because of the lack of other people being able to be there. But the reason why that's too difficult is why, because it's so difficult, that's why we often put negatives on things like suicide, because we don't know how to talk to each other about suicide. And so we instead call it a great sin, and we don't deal with it. Mental illness is often treated that same way, right?
Yeah.
And we run from each other.
Yeah.
When we ought to be running toward each other.
And we ought to be, right?
I noticed something in the movie that I had not noticed. I think I'd seen it twice before. And I noticed it last night. We watched it the first time, and that was that it was a commentary on Southern culture.
Mm.
And where I suddenly realized that was when George Clooney's character talked about hydroelectrifying the South.
Mm-hmm.
Now the South was going to rise up and become this modern, healthy place. And after everything we'd seen, I suddenly realized the irony. And I have to say, watching the election results and seeing the states that are red after 4 years of what we've experienced, I don't know how to process that people still can vote for this person, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's poignant for me.
Yeah. But part of the reason for that, okay, so like I drive up and down Kolb periodically. There's a church right there, kind of by the old movie theaters right in that area. And they have a sign up right now that said, our God the same yesterday and forever, type of sign. I can't remember exactly what it says. And I'm not trying to say that's not right, but what we often mean is don't make me change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That God is speaking exactly the same way as what I heard when I was 5 years old. And so I'm staying in my first grade theology rather than let that God change me and draw me.
Yeah.
And so it's simpler. It's just not, for me at least, how my definition of God works.
You know, one of the most exciting teachings I ever heard was by this Catholic nun, and I can never remember her name. It's like Delia.
Donchester?
No, it's like Sister Delia or something. Anyway, she's literally an astrophysicist. Anyway, she talks about the cosmos, but she talks about God, that we have this understanding of God as the Alpha and the Omega, but we are so focused on the beginning, the historic. That's where God is. And she suggests that God is the newest thing that we see.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I mean, to me, that's kind of like you're talking about this journey and how you can get, so changed by something. And that's where God is happening. And I do think that that's a fault in churches, is they're so hung up on this historic story that's where God is. And that's not where God is. He's moved on, or it has moved on, yeah, whatever. So
But
anyway, that teaching.
Yeah, but in this story that was really epitomized right at the end, when the gang, the Soggy Bottom Boys, had been pardoned by the governor, right? So off they go to the house, and there waiting are the people who have been pursuing them the whole time. And
Yep.
they tell the truth. Hey, the truth is like this. Well, we ain't got a radio.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? So we don't know that. We don't believe that. We don't want to. And we do that often, I think. I already have the truth. Why do I need more truth?
Yeah. Right.
And then God sends the flood to wipe out.
God sends a flood. Right?
Just a sake of time too.
But our arrogance in thinking that we already know, I think, is a pretty typical thing. How many think you know exactly what ought to happen in every election you vote in? Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And elections always draw us in some way or another differently.
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever gone through one election where everything I wanted happened. I don't think.
Yeah, that's true. It's a mixed bag.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's God at work too.
Maybe that's God at work too.
Doesn't want you to settle down into. I love what has been said. Who said it? Anyway, Sharon, I think that God is at the leading edge is another way of stating that too. That I like that a lot. It's not past. It's not. It's here now and on the leading edge of our lives and what we think and what we do. That's really motivating.
Yep. But the tough part about that, John, is that we sometimes don't understand it. For example, after the flood, as they're floating there around, and right before they find Tommy on the roll top desk, which gives them a ring and all of that stuff, right? They see a very interesting image, a cow on a roof.
On a,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. I forgot that. Yeah.
And they all kind of just look at each other going, what was that? I don't get this, right? And we have, I think, a thirst to get it, to be convinced that we know,
Mhm.
have the right answer. And then all of a sudden the Coens just throw in this cow on a roof.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was
prophesied.
Yeah.
By the guy on the.
Yeah.
That was one of the things he prophesied, was that
Yeah.
there would be a cow on the roof of a barn or yeah.
And you just go, wait a second. But I think the reason why we want to think we have it all is because that's much simpler than to be in the questions. Isn't
Well, I
it?
have to say, I've been thinking about the story of ancient Israel demanding a king. When I see these people that are voting for Trump, I feel like that's kind of what's behind that. It's like they want somebody who's going to defend this status quo that is not working for so many people, but they want a king, and that same inability to see, like you said, John, the leading edge of God, the change.
Right.
I'm going to say something that's a little different here. And the end of the movie, when Ulysses' effort does not get the right ring for Penny,
Yeah.
and he is going to have to continue to search. So Ulysses' search is never over.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting as well.
That was a good one.
After he goes through all his adventures and miraculously recovers the ring.
Yeah. But what a perfect.
That's good, Diane. I didn't pick up on, that's true. You gotta keep looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's because he got what he wanted, which is his wife back, but she had some issues. So
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
got to be the right ring,
Yeah. Oh,
which is important, of course.
of course.
But at least part of what that brings out is that there's a whole lot of other things that pull us and push us different ways, right? To go through the whole adventure and get the required thing, the thing that she said was in the roll top, and here it is. And it doesn't mean that we've solved the issue completely. It doesn't mean that we understand things perfectly.
Right.
No matter how much we have doggedly pursued that and successfully completed it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep.
Our odysseys are always larger, different. Go ahead. Kat.
Yeah, I think the struggle is with not knowing. And I'm struck by the fact that people continue to have fears that get played on. They continue to not want to think, not want to do the work. And they do want, I think in maybe in other parts of the world, but perhaps most tellingly in this country, people want it easy. That people, I think too many people we're spoiled in a way. We have so much and yet we want more, we covet more.
Yeah.
And I think that's our downfall. And I think that's a trap that we fall into that traps us, because there's never enough.
Mhm.
For some people, they always want something else beyond the next hill, in the next valley, in the next field. It's always greener, instead of being able to celebrate and be present. And I think there's an awful lot of looking in the past and looking back, or too much looking forward and not being right here now.
Yeah. And I think it is those two different things that are really in conflict in a way. That which is the foundation upon which we stand, but which gives us the ability to leap. So some of us are so busy leaping that we never sit on the foundation long enough, but some of us sit on that foundation, like as they've gone, when they're at the banquet, right? At one point somebody says something like, they're stepping on our venerated rituals.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a foundation type of thing, which maybe it's time to step on those in order to jump to the next thing. But if you're just jumping and not having any of those venerated spaces, you're also not quite right. And finding the right space between those two is difficult.
Mhm.
Because the journey doesn't quite let you stop, but how do you stop enough?
There was a thought in Christian theology that developed over millennia that ended up in the formulation that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. And at one time it hit me that that's kind of an evolutionary force, because what we human beings can conceive is a growing thing. It's not static. So what seemed good to us in the past often today we think of something better than that. And I think that's an interesting
Yeah.
concept of God,
Yeah, absolutely. But isn't that true about just about everything, whether or not we want to admit it, that what my body can do now can't be measured by the standards that I used 20 or 40 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be okay with reevaluating,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But there's also the advantages that I have today that I didn't have back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life is a moving target.
Life is a moving, and spirituality is a moving target.
It's a living thing.
It's a living thing.
Yes.
Bottom line is, for me, it's relational, and relational never is not a static target.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Everett needed to get to, and he had a timeline of when he needed to get to his house, but yet he stopped to get Pete,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what today is challenging you to live life differently than yesterday? And I don't mean just because an election happened yesterday and that today now we're in a new quadrennium. What else is there?
Aging.
Uh-huh.
Aging brings
Yeah.
questions and challenges. Yeah.
I think especially this month, being thankful for just so many things, so many ordinary things that we just pass by.
Thank you.
Puppy time.
I wasn't sure if, Sandy, if you were finished talking or if that was just you continuing on. I'm just kidding.
I would meow. I don't bark. I meow.
Could you say it again?
Yeah.
It was important. I wanted to hear it.
Yeah, I said that especially this month, we need to think about being thankful. So many times we just go through life and just don't even notice things, and to really stop and notice and be thankful for the littlest things that make our life good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's part of the reason why we, on a regular basis, tend to circle back to the same stories. We come to Christmas every year, type of thing. We come to 4th of July every year. We come to Thanksgiving every year. Why? Because it reminds us of that part of the cycle that we need.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to touch on the relational part of that each one of those sacred spaces that we create during the year has to do with the relationships that we've built around those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have a grandson who has for years been saying we have our traditions, and he is now 25. Yeah, and we still have our traditions. And I think it's real important. You build your relationships on traditions. You can expand those traditions or change them, but still those traditions remind you of the relationship.
Right. Right.
And it's things sometimes that go way back when we were babysitting him, and he remembers macaroni and cheese, things like that.
It's interesting because in politics, liberal and conservative have this character. The conservative doesn't want anything to change, and the liberal always wants everything to change. And neither one can be an absolute. We need both.
Right.
Yes, we do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I think at least part of what all of this is all of this political stuff we're going through right now is trying to make us break those hard lines that we've drawn.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The artificially hard lines that say that so-and-so is only this and I'm only that. And it's never true about any of us. Not in the hard way we talk about it.
And your question was, what today are you recognizing, need to change? I mean, for me, it's like the numbers in this election are just mind-boggling to me, that many people see the world so differently than I do.
Yeah.
And what a challenge that is in front of us to try to come to peace with that, to come to peace, hopefully, with these people. I mean, I feel like this is this amazing new thing that's happening that has been there, obviously, but we've only become aware of it in these last 2 elections, of this whole swath of our population that is so different. And, I have to understand them, and I know part of it is, we were talking this morning, I have cousins who I'm sure are Trump supporters, and I think about their lives and, trying to remember like all the good stuff they do and how charitable they are, and, just trying to work with your mind. That's the call right now that I'm hearing today,
That's right.
last night. So
At least part of what you want to remember about all of that is this. We all succeeded in this election. We succeeded incredibly, marvelously well. Why? Because highest vote turnout ever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Ever.
that's true.
Right? And we had become relatively passive on the political scene.
Mhm.
Now, you might not like the activity of whoever it is that opposes you politically, but they're active and they're involved in the ongoing work in this world. And that's not a bad thing, even if right now they're the obstacle in front of you.
Yeah.
And they view you as the obstacle in front of them.
That a few evenings ago on the NewsHour, maybe others of you saw it, Amnon Nawaz interviewed 4 people who were not going to vote and had not voted in the last cycle. That really got to me, especially one man who had, well, they had all given up, or they said, it doesn't make any difference, that sort of thing. We've heard that before. But this one man really touched my heart. And he couldn't articulate what it is that is so disappointing in his life. But it's so deep that he said, I never realized anything out of it. Doesn't matter, no matter what it's like. And he was hardly articulate, but I felt such compassion for him. I thought if he did vote, he would be in the red zone probably. But that meant nothing compared with how he was feeling and trying to express his despair, really. I wonder if anybody else saw that. That really moved me. I've made some vows to be more trying to understand a little bit more what the red areas are about.
I didn't see that interview, but I was also thinking today about how animals, when they're hurt, they go off under a bush and they just lick their wounds. It's like they just want to be. And I certainly feel that way right now. No matter what the outcome of this is, it's been stunning, just the division in our country. So for me, it's like I need a time, to get away, to lick my wounds a little bit. I think it's been traumatic. And I could see somebody getting stuck in that place, where they don't emerge from that need to comfort themselves, by disengaging.
Yeah, and the difficulty is this. I look at my conservative friends and I think that they have really important things to grieve about. And I may not have the same importance of some of those things, but if I never listen to them, I never give them permission to leave that space. I never help them to continue on the journey. They sit there in that grieving space.
Yeah.
How do I help them? How do I help them struggle in the moment, whatever it is?
Yeah, I think our new son-in-law is what would, if you just looked at the aspects of his life, fit into the blue collar, red zone kind of guy. He works in construction, he hunts, he grew up, he's white, he grew up with a single mom. He had to drop out of high school to help support his family. And he is, I didn't see that interview, but he is of the mind that voting doesn't matter. Whoever gets in office is not going to help me. You know, I help myself. And 4 years in a relationship with our daughter has convinced him, at least mildly, that voting is important. And he did vote, and he did vote for Joe Biden and Mark Kelly. And maybe he can start to see that it's not just all on his shoulders. You know, I think that's a lot of what some of our more conservative relatives feel like. It's all on them to do everything for themselves, and governments only help other people. So I think just, I don't know, getting to know people better. I mean, we've never preached politics at Trevor, but he sees the way that Scott and I live our lives and the things we do. And maybe we've, you know, tilted his conceptions of our kind of people a little bit, as he has tilted our perceptions of people who go out and hunt on the weekends.
It sounds suspiciously, Doris, like you're saying that hitting somebody with my political sign is not necessarily going to change their point of view.
No, I'll try that. It doesn't work.
But it feels like that's what we do, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
It's a challenge to walk the high road. It's a big challenge. I've had just a plethora of emotions, including thinking that if I was younger and if the unforeseeable came to pass, that I would love to just leave my country, which is just kind of antithetical to me, and I don't feel that I can do that. But the thought strikes me that if I were much younger, I might be tempted. And then I thought about not wanting to be here under certain circumstances and put up with 4 more years of what has been pretty difficult. And then I'm not the kind of person that gives up easily. I don't, for myself, believe in I'm healthy, therefore I have a place in this world. So I don't want to commit suicide. That is not in my thought processes, even really casually, but those are options that people have. But I think that what you're saying is we have to be able to see differently. And we have to be able to look at the whole spectrum, not just a narrow band. That's the harder part. I'm getting the goosebumps when I'm saying this. That's the hard part, the really hard part for me. What do I want to be, and who do I want to be, and how do I want to be? And I feel like our church affiliation is important, and how does the church help each of us answer these questions and be more and better now?
I just want to follow up on that a little bit. That call that Scott mentioned about us going to Singapore happened in 1972, which was in the midst of the Vietnam War and the Richard Nixon presidency and the shootings at Kent State. And we were delighted to leave this country, just delighted. But after we spent 3 years in Singapore, we spent 4 years in rural Indonesia. And I came to see all that is great about our country in the years that we spent there. You know, it healed me a lot to get an outside perspective of our country and to see that, you know, we don't get locked up in jails forever for no reason like they do in Indonesia. You know, we have poverty, but not where 40% of our children die before age 1. You know, it was really helpful to get an outside perspective of our country. And kind of gives me hope now that, well, I think this might be even worse than that period in our history. I do have hope that we'll emerge from it. So,
You know, Doris, at least one of the reasons why I take people down to Peru with me, besides the fact that I really like that place, is that I think every American needs to see more than just what America teaches us. And it's not that what we have is wrong, it's that we don't know that it's limited. We think it tells a perfect view of the world. And as soon as you go into a different space, a foreign space, you see that there's other ways to view that we don't easily teach each other. Sometimes it teaches us what we've forgotten.
Yeah.
There's
as we've
another
grown up or whatever. Go ahead.
There's another aspect to that too, Jim, in traveling abroad. You begin to care about the people whose country you're in.
Yeah.
I find that now when I've come back from somewhere where we've been out of the country, that I tend to read newspaper articles about what's happening in that country, because I know just a little bit about who the people are. And it starts me caring about
A piece of your heart stays in that country.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
That's a
Not
good
at
thing.
all.
A good
It's a good
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
The hard part is kind of trying to tell the difference between that which rightfully calls our heart and that which is the siren calling us off the path. Right? Because the siren calls us over there, but then turns us into a toad. Right? And trying to figure out what is that which is truly helping me grow is difficult.
Mhm.
What's impeding my journey, and how do I tell the difference?
Yeah.
Siren's real seductive.
Very,
Yeah.
very.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that you've always got to get out of yourself. And I really haven't traveled in foreign countries. I've traveled outside the United States, but not to Europe or South America or things like that. But I grew up in Wisconsin, and just growing up in a pretty insular and predictable environment. And I married at 20, and my husband was an NCO, airman in the Air Force. And so I began to give myself a lot of experiences, and boy, did I do a lot of growing up in the process. And I had to examine a lot of different things and figure out, who am I? What works for me? Where do I fit in the scheme of things? And I guess it was my own, I never thought of it as an odyssey, but it certainly was. I lived in the South, and that's where the children were born, in Louisiana and Shreveport. And for a very brief time, I had a maid, and I just couldn't stomach it. But I did it because one of the neighbors, she was an officer's wife, and she had grown up in, I think, Georgia or something. And so she was acculturated to that. So I tried it on for size, and I was so ashamed at having somebody else come into my house to clean my toilet that I stopped having her come, because I thought, this isn't me. This is not who I am. I can clean my own toilets, and I don't want somebody else. I don't want to pay somebody else to come do that for me that I can do for myself. And that's just one kind of crazy example, but I think that's, part of it is that so many people have not gotten out into the world, or they've only gotten into, again, a narrow path, even if they've maybe left home. But did they incorporate anything new in the process, or did they try to, drag everything along and keep everything pretty much the same? Did they let anything new, and did they try anything new? Or did they just stay on this safe, sure path without questioning it? Where am I really going? What am I choosing? And why am I choosing it?
But that's because oftentimes in our lives, we have somebody a couple rows back going, do not seek the treasure, right? And it's a voice that maybe we respect. We can tell it's Pete back there, but is that the right story? Is that the voice we should listen to? And it's going to be seductive in some ways. It's going to tell us some truth, but is it the right truth?
Yeah.
The hard part about life is it is not formulaic, and it doesn't give us simple answers.
Mhm.
The
You
hard
have-
part is the good part.
Yeah, you have to just keep living it. And living life is not a bad thing, but it's complicated some days.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons are because of each other, right? I complicate it for you, you complicate it for me, and we have to figure out what to do in that complication.
Just stop.
The hard part though is this, like with Grace, I sat with her as she went through grieving her husband. You know why she grieves? Because they were together 60 some years,
Yeah.
right? The only way to not go through the struggle of that moment is to never have been with the
Yeah.
person that you love,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that relational aspect of what life is also causes the damage, the hardship, the struggle. I mean, when Pete said, do not seek the treasure, what they heard was, we got to go break Pete out of there.
Yeah.
He needs to be with us. And so it meant a deviation from their journey from seeking the treasure to go and seek the relationship.
Right. Yep. Mhm.
So next week, our movie is called White Heat. I do not have a DVD copy of it. I have a VHS copy, but the best way to be able to find it is any of the digital ways. It is on YouTube. It is on Amazon. Find it one of those ways. It costs $2 or $3 to get. That's the easiest way to be able to find and do it. Okay.
It's a goodie. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's called White Heat.
White Heat with James Cagney.
Okay. 1944, I think.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
About 1950.
Oh, was it that
There you
late?
go.
Gosh.
But it's from that whole genre called film noir, which is an interesting genre, which
Yeah.
Yeah.
killed the theaters as our parents and grandparents were living their lives.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
Have a
you.
very good week.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.